Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 18th, 2026. So it's a day after the release of Christopher Nolan's long-awaited Greek epic, The Odyssey. And from the reviews that I've seen, it was a success. Christopher Nolan scored a tour de force, and it was Oscar worthy in all segments of the movie. Um, they say Matt Damon's performance was Oscar worthy as well. And a reviewer actually said Matt Damon's performance was the best he's ever, he's ever displayed, which is saying something because Matt Damon is always perfect in every role he plays. He throws himself, right? He loses himself in everything. He's one of the most remarkable actors. If you've seen talented Mr. Ripley, or if he's playing, Jason Bourne in Bourne Identities, if he's playing a spy. I've read the book, the Bourne series, right, by Robert Ludlum, and he is exactly Jason Bourne. You could see his acting, his eyes. He has this paranoid look in his eyes. He's always on edge. He looks dangerous. He's Bourne, and when he goes to play something else, if he's playing talented Mr. Ripley, a con artist, a shady, a shady character, shapeshifter. You don't really know who he is. He's got this Jekyll and Hyde personality, and snake in the green grass. That's odious, contemptible. He always loses himself in the character. He's perfect, and so I'll be happy for him if he wins Oscar for Best Actor. I didn't go and see it yesterday, even though a friend of mine is taking me to see it. But I didn't want to see it on first night. Christopher Nolan, of course, a remarkable director. I remember seeing Dark Knight. Christopher Nolan directed Dark Knight. That's one of the Batman sequels, played by Christian Bale, one of my other great actors. And after the movie, at the end of the movie, there was this spontaneous applause, standing ovation and applause. It was very satisfying, and so I can imagine what happened yesterday. But I'm going to get to see it later on. So, in one of the reviews that I saw, the guy, interestingly, was throwing jibes at students who had not really read the Odyssey but had used Cliff Notes, right? Cliff Notes are like summaries that you can use in school, that students use. They're available online. And so he decides to give his own take, his own narrative before giving his review of the film. He decides to give his narrative, and it was apparent from his narrative, right, his description, that he had not read the Odyssey, right. And this guy, like, he has 4 million subscribers on his YouTube channel, 4 million, but you'd expect that he would read the Odyssey, right? It's just over 400 pages. The translation I read was by Evie Rio, right? An Englishman. I think it was an Englishman, Evie Rio. Very interesting, and I guess that's why they use that phrase that stuck with me: "Eats me out of house and home," right? With respect to the suitors who were wasting the resources and wealth of Odysseus in his home when they were trying to court his wife Penelope, his grieving wife. So I decided in this video, what I'm just going to do is just provide a brief summary of what the Odyssey is, right? Try and read the book. It's just over 400 pages. It's very well written. And unfortunately, the end of it is very gory, very graphic. And because there's a bloodbath, right? The last scene is a bloodbath, and it's interesting that This guy, the reviewer who obviously hadn't read the book but was throwing jibes at students who hadn't read it, who used cliff notes. He hadn't read the book. He was talking about how the story is about how Odysseus had done terrible things during the Trojan War, and that war was so horrible. This was his interpretation, right? A war was so horrible, and that was why he was suffering all these terrible things because of what he had done during the war. And in the end, he wanted to be a better man. He wanted to be a better man, and in the end, he was a better man. And that's what the story is about. No, 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 no. That's absolutely not what the story is about. But I don't want to give my interpretation now. I'm just going to give a quick summary, and I'll do another video debunking the interpretations and give my own interpretation of what the Odyssey is about. The Odyssey is clearly not about Odysseus being remorseful about war, right? He doesn't show any remorse about war because you can see he was stranded from his away from his home. Took him 10 years. I mean, 20 years away. 10 years was the Trojan War, and it was at at the end of the Trojan War, all the Greek leaders, right, the commanders, they dispersed. Some died. Agamemnon went home and he was killed by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. They killed him in a disgraceful manner, right? And because Agamemnon was the most powerful of the Greek kings, the commander of the armies, right? But he was killed in such a disgraceful, odious manner. Achilles was killed, right? So Odysseus sees these people in the underworld. So different people, were lost, but Odysseus was wandering. In the end, when he eventually gets home, where he'd been pining for to go back to his wife, when he eventually gets home, you see, he turns his home into a bloodbath. He was unrelenting, unforgiving, and that's actually the most horrifying part of the book. And I didn't understand why Homer wrote it, described it in such gory terms, right? He turned his home into a bloodbath, into a war field. It was horrifying. He was, relentless. He showed no pity, no compassion whatsoever. Even somebody who'd shown him compassion, he killed him, right? Odysseus was like very cruel in the way he annihilated the suitors who had eaten him out of house and home when he returned home. So I'm going to do a summary later on, but now I'm just going to give a brief summary of what the Odyssey is about. But again, importantly, in the end, he was not remorseful. It wasn't about him lamenting the horrors of war, because he did. The final act is about war, right? He turned his home into a war field, a battlefield, and destroying his enemies. And his son, did something horrible. Hanged his female servants who slept with the suitors, right? So there was it's a tale about loyalty, right? And I'm going to do another video, but importantly, it is about. So you see loyalty, so you see family. Family was very important to him. But the glory of the battlefield, you can see Odysseus is not remorseful of that. He doesn't regret the glories of battle, right? Because when he goes into the underworld, he is actually. So the underworld was a place of where the dead people go and reside in. So he goes into the underworld. He sees his mother, who was heartbroken, died from heartbreak while he was gone. Nobody knew what was wrong, what was up with him, right? So, and then he saw Achilles, and Achilles, was a hero of the Iliad, right? The first book by Homer, right? So, and he's reminding Achilles of how great he was alive, and because Achilles was the greatest of the warriors, right? But Achilles then is very he's dolorous, and Achilles they have this death look. Of course, it's their ghosts he's seeing, right? They're in the underworld, right? The place of the dead. And Achilles said he would rather be a slave, um, a living slave, right? Serving a poor tenant farmer, right? Serving a poor farmer. He'd rather be a living slave serving a poor farmer than be the king of all the dead. So um, I'll do another video and just provide an interpretation of what it was. But you could see Odysseus. Uh, he didn't regret the glories of war, right? That was something he embraced, and he turned his home into a battlefield in the end. The story does show the it shows how the gods, again, this is Greek mythology, right? The Olympian gods, the various and the smaller gods, right? The were manipulating, try to manipulate man, right? So Odysseus represents the nobility, the dignity, the tenacity, and the resourcefulness of man, right? Of humanity. Odysseus was offered immortality many times, right? Calypso offered to turn him into an immortal, right? So long as he stayed with her and married her, and refused. He was pining for his wife, whom he hadn't seen in 20 years, who had clearly gotten old. He didn't know if she was still alive, but he wanted his family. He just wanted the comfort of his wife, his family, that wife he'd married, the mother of his child. That was all he was pining for. He would make love to Calypso every time because she was a goddess. So, and there was something that I didn't also that I was concerned about. I'm glad that the movie turned out to be a masterpiece. Everybody, the reviews are great for Christopher Nolan. I'm glad. I had thought he might have taken some creative liberties in the bravado that we saw displayed by Matt Damon in some of the trailers when he says he's going to get home and the gods can't stop him. Again, remember, Odysseus actually feared the gods, right? He feared the gods. So yes, he had hubris amongst humans, right? He felt very competent amongst humans, but he accidentally, right, blinded the son of Poseidon, right, the brother of Zeus, right? Poseidon was the god of the seas, and he had blinded Polyphemus, the one-eyed Cyclops, and he told him, in his arrogance when he escaped, right, because he'd done a clever thing, lying to Polyphemus, that's the Cyclops, that his name was nobody, right? And so when people were trying to help him after they'd blinded the Cyclops, and his brothers, the other Cyclops, were trying to help him, trying to figure out what was going on, why was he wailing, and we're saying, who's harming you? And he was saying, nobody, right? And so he got away, made it to his ship, but Odysseus just had to, he was very brash. He was arrogant in his hubris. He goes that, okay, that if anybody asks him who hurt him, who blinded him, who destroyed him, he should say it was Odysseus, right? Odysseus, right? So he's Odysseus of the nimble wits. And so Polyphemus, the Cyclops, knows who it is, but he's the son of Poseidon, right? So Odysseus was impulsive in that moment, right? He wasn't deliberately trying to hurt the gods, because if you're seeing he's constantly listening to the gods. He's constantly obeying the gods. In fact, there was a time, the first time we see that he's unfaithful, when he sleeps with the witch Circe, who's also a goddess, right? Who had turned his men into swine. Hermes, one of the sons of Zeus, who was the messenger god and the god of travelers, and Hermes appeared to him and gave him instruction on what he could do to free his men. And Hermes told him to sleep with Circe. That Circe is going to invite him to be her lover, to her bed, and he shouldn't refuse her if he wants his men to be, if he wants to free his men, because she had turned them to swine, to pigs, and that was why he did that. He didn't refuse. He did what the god Hermes had told him to do, and although he ends up being captivated, that's another story. But so let me get back now. Let me get into the story about Odysseus. So, uh, the Odyssey, right? It starts at the end, right, of the Trojan War. So the Trojan War had ended. The Trojan War is in the Iliad. Many of us who've seen Troy, that was the Iliad. That was about the Trojan War, right? Iliad. It adds other Greek tragedians, right? The tragedians who a tragedy, that was what they were called before we had the novel, right? A Greek tragedy, right? Right. So there are bits and pieces from other Greek poets, Greek writers, classical Greek writers. So it's at the end of the Trojan War, and all the commanders have dispersed, and they've encountered their fates, right? Most of them bad, but Odysseus. So he's the protagonist of the story, right? It's about him. If they're not talking about Odysseus, you see something else that's central. It's women, right? Women are very central. They're very powerful in this story, and that's to address. I saw a critique, an interview of Lupita Nyong'o, who plays Helen of Troy. She's one of my favorite actresses. That's Lupita. I love Lupita. But Lupita said something. She said Homer didn't showcase women. He didn't properly represent women. They didn't have enough time. No, no, no. Women are central to this thing. The only other people that are central from Odysseus, are women. And women, they cause him problems. They get him out of problems. They control him. They help him. His patron god that was helping him was a woman, Athena, right, who was making everything go well. They were the ones who held him captive, women. So, like I said, I'll do another video providing interpretation. So I'm just going to provide the summary of Odysseus. So, so he wants to return home. That's his desire. But he goes onto this island, he and his men, and because they wander onto this island, and then they see cheese and they eat the cheese, but his men want to leave. But Odysseus is actually following traditions, Greek convention and tradition. So there was a tradition amongst the Greek civilization of his era of being hospitable to strangers and travelers, like of being hospitable to strangers and travelers according to the law of Zeus. So Zeus is the chief god of the Greeks, right, in the classical era, right, lives on Mount Olympus, right? So, and Odysseus wants to follow this law. So you can see Odysseus actually follows, he venerates the Greek gods, right? So he wants to follow the law, and so he says he's going to wait, right, and introduce himself to the owner of the house. He didn't know who he was. He didn't want to, thought it would be rude for them to just grab the food and leave, but he wanted to meet the owner of the house, because the owner of the house owed them hospitality according to the laws of Zeus, right? So you can see him following the laws of Zeus, the instruction of the gods. So this gets him into trouble, right? So the Greek hospitality then was called Xenia. So he gets him into trouble. So a giant comes in, locks them in, rolls his stone and locks them in, traps them. And his name was Polyphemus. Is a one-eyed cyclops, one-eyed monster, is a giant. He grabs two of his men, smashes them on the rocks, and he eats them. That's not hospitality. And so, because Odysseus is lecturing him about, that he owes them hospitality according to the laws of Zeus. And Polyphemus the Cyclops is pissed because his own father is Poseidon. Poseidon and Zeus, they're brothers, but they hate one another. Everyone once in a while they sort of rival. Poseidon, Zeus is the most powerful of the gods. He's the chief of the gods, right? So this guy Polyphemus, that's a Cyclops, being lectured to by Odysseus about what Zeus ordered, right, only pissed him off because his father Poseidon is another god, is sort of Zeus's rival, right? even though they're brothers, it's his rival. So he's pissed. So he's eating them and tells them he's going to eat all of them, right? So eventually, though, Odysseus tricks him, gets him to offers him wine, gets him drunk. He'd never drunk wine, so Odysseus gives him wine. So when he gets drunk, the guy promises that okay, he's not gonna eat. He's gonna eat Odysseus last, right? What's Odysseus's name? Right? He's playing with his food, right? That's what the Cyclops is doing. So Odysseus tells him his name is Nobody. Odysseus is smart. He tells him his name is Nobody. So he said, okay. So when he goes to sleep, the men they had sharpened a stake they put in the fire, huge giant stake, and they burst his eye right with the stake. He had just one eye, so they stabbed him in the eye, so he becomes blind, and he's screaming. And at that point, his brothers, the other Cyclops outside, they hear because he's locked his cave. He trapped them with this huge rock, and he tells they're asking who is it, and they say no, it's nobody. Nobody's blinded him. Nobody. So those people think he's saying there's nothing wrong with him. He's just screaming because he just wants to scream for no reason, right? And so eventually, anyway, they have this smart way and have him. He rolls out the stone and they escape. So as they're escaping, that's when Odysseus makes the mistake, right? Pride goes before a fall. So that was the beginning of Odysseus's troubles. Odysseus had to let him know that okay, hey, he's the smart guy. He's the one who actually blinded him. He's the one who's just outwitted, this giant Cyclops. And he tells him, anybody asks you who blinded you, tell them it was I, Odysseus, right? So, and then now the Cyclops knows who he was, and then he appeals to his father Poseidon to have his revenge and curse Odysseus. So Poseidon curses him, and that's the beginning of his trouble. So he's wandering. The curse Poseidon places on him is to wander the seas, right? Wander the seas, and he has all these troubles. Odysseus he's wandering. He just wants to go home. So he's wandering the seas. He's just being thrown around in circles, one crisis after another. But he's escaping them all, right? He's waiting because even though he's been cursed by one god, Poseidon, right? And Poseidon's god of the seas. The other gods who favor him, right? Hermes helps him. Like when he sees Circe, Hermes appears to him and tells him what he can do to escape the witch, right? The goddess Circe, and he gives her an antidote herb, right? It's called a Mali, right? That made him immune to her magic, right? Insulated him from her magic because she had this magic drink that would turn men into animals. And so when he drank it, because he'd been given the Mali, he wasn't transformed. He was just the same, right? So he had these gods who were helping him, and eventually, though, Athena eventually goes to appeal to Zeus, the chief god, that look, this guy has suffered long enough because eventually he was held captive again by another goddess, Calypso. So every time he gets back on the seas, he's shipwrecked, and then something happens. He eventually lost all his men. Then he's held captive by another goddess, right, named Calypso on her island, Ogygia, and he's in the lap of luxury, and she offers him immortality, but he refuses it because he just wants his wife, right? So you can see, so that's the defiance. So there was a byline in the movie that I noticed, about him, that he's going to get home, that he defied the gods, right? He was subservient and he honored the gods, but in terms of would he give up his humanity for immortality, he refused. I think that's where he defied the gods, because he was being offered immortality by Calypso. He refused. She held him captive for 7 years. There was another, he didn't want to stay with them. He chose to remain human. He wanted to, and he wanted his human, his mortal wife back, his mortal family. That was what he wanted. He didn't want to exchange it for immortality. So that's how he sort of defied the gods. So eventually, though, Zeus orders that they should set him free. Ironically, Poseidon was not at that council, that meeting where Zeus agrees to his daughter Athena. Athena is the patron god of of Odysseus. She keeps helping him. She appears to him at various times in the movie, and she keeps helping him. So Athena in Greek mythology is god of war and wisdom, right? And Odysseus is very smart, right? Odysseus, by the way, was the one who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse. That was the way that they should build this huge horse, and the soldiers should hide in there, and so the Trojans would let the horse in, and when they're sleeping, they'll come out and slaughter the Trojans, right? So that was Odysseus's idea, right? In Iliad. So Odysseus is very smart. He's very clever. So eventually, when Zeus gives the instruction that okay, that Calypso should let him go, right? Uh, Poseidon is not there. Poseidon, who's the one giving him all the troubles, who's cursed him, who's punishing him. Poseidon was actually away in Ethiopia. So in classical Greek era, Africa, what's known as Africa today, was called Ethiopia, right, or Libya, right, because um, that name Africa didn't come until the time of the Romans, right? It was the Romans who called, their province of Africa, Africa. They called it Africa, and it caught on later on in the Middle Ages, right? So then it was called Ethiopia. So Poseidon was actually away in Africa. So the Greeks, right, actually honored Africans. They respected black people. They venerated them. They thought they were favored by the gods. So Ethiopia actually means black, or burnt face, land of the burnt faces. That's what they called black. That's what the Greeks called the black people then, right? So they respected black people, and so you see, Poseidon was actually away socializing. They were holding a feast in his honor. So that's what Africans Africans were called Ethiopians again, right, back then. So they were honoring him. So he was away when Zeus made the decision, and eventually when he goes back just one last time, he gives him one final. He smashes his raft one last time on his way home after he left Calypso, but another goddess helped him. Her name was Leucothea. Leucothea had once been mortal, and now she was a queen, but I've done a video talking about his story, and so gives him a magic veil, right, to help him so he doesn't drown, and he should strip himself naked. So he's saved. He lands on the island of the Phaeacians, right, of Scheria, and Nausicaa, a beautiful princess, the daughter of King Alcinous, right, and Arit, she finds him, and then he appeals to the parents' hospitality, their grace, and they were gracious, and they helped him get back home. So he gets back home. They give him a lot of gold, and their ships, they stock his ship with a lot of gold and luxuries. And he gets back home. When he gets back home, he devises this bloodbath, right? So he unleashes his bloodbath on the suitors of his wife. Very important also is the role of his wife, the loyalty of his wife in the 20 years, because they thought he was dead. Nobody knew what had happened to Odysseus, right? And so there were suitors who wanted her hand, who wanted to marry her, but she was holding out, and she had hope that he would return. And so you could see her loyalty and her craftiness. So she pretended. She told them that, okay, you know what? She wants to weave this cloth, a death cloth for her father-in-law, that he's old, so that's her duty. And she said when she finishes weaving the cloth, then she'll pick a suitor to marry. So she weaves the cloth throughout the day because the suitors come, so she doesn't have to attend to them. She pretends she's weaving the cloth throughout the day. She's weaving the cloth. Then at night, she unravels what she's done all over. So she has to start again. She's saying, oh, that her weaving the cloth is taking a long time, right? So so she's very clever in deceiving her suitors. But eventually, Odysseus, like I said, returned. He strings his bow. There's a role of his bow. He's the only one who can string the bow. She provides another task for them, that whoever can string Odysseus's bow, she'd marry. Nobody could string it except Odysseus. Odysseus came pretending to be a beggar, an old beggar. He'd been transformed by the goddess Athena to look like an old beggar, so nobody could recognize him. But eventually, he strings the bow as an old beggar, and it was obvious that it was Odysseus. And then he kills all of them. He slaughters them, and they slaughter the maidservants who had become lovers of the suitors as well. For some reason, his son, they hanged them. It was brutal. So that was a very gory scene. I learned from the reviewers. They said it was almost like Christopher Nolan made a horror movie, right? It was close to being a horror movie, right? In reading the book, that's actually the most horrific part of the book, right? The slaughter in his home, right? The final slaughter. So that's the story of the Odyssey. It's called the greatest story ever told. Now I'm going to do another video and talk about the various interpretations. I'm going to debunk the interpretations out there, including Lupita Nyong'o's interpretation that there are no women. Women are actually very central in the Odyssey. You'd actually think Homer was a prototype feminist, right? In the way he treats women, he doesn't. Women are very powerful in the Odyssey, actually, and for those times, right? For this is over 2,000 years ago. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.